we're in trouble when even Forbes magazine does an analysis of the UN Small Arms Treaty and finds, yes, this is written where they can register guns and then start banning them. No kidding, Unidir meeting. Just look it up at the UN when they first wrote this treaty. It's the same treaty today. Back in July of 2001, July 7th, said the civilian ownership of firearms threatens the legitimate power monopoly of the state. I don't know about you, but I don't think the state needs a power monopoly. In fact, can you imagine Thomas Jefferson hearing the U.S. governments try to sign on to a treaty saying that civilians should have their guns all taken because the state should have a monopoly of power? How about a separation of powers? Whereas I lean more towards total liberty and what extremists would call anarchy, I understand it doesn't work in large groups of people because there's always people that get together in gangs. And so, but that's what government turns into. So there's the anarchical capitalist argument right there. The point here is that we're repeating history right now. In Rome under Caesar, or in Latin American or African countries or Asian countries today, it's military coups. President Eisenhower in his farewell address warned us of the military-industrial complex, beware. He went on to say the technocratic elite that controls it, though. That part's always left out. Go watch the full film. It's online. Just type in full farewell address Eisenhower. Sounds like Alex Jones. The point is, Army, or Alex Jones sounds like Eisenhower. Army manual outlines plan to kill Americans, demonstrators, you name it. That's the Infowars.com article. The one that broke it is HongPong.com. That's Dan Feidt's site. Warning shot will not be fired. MPs trained in martial law in America. And that's a 300-plus page. Well, one part of it's 300. There's more. Gun confiscation, mortar attacks, mass slaughtering. I mean, you want North Korea, baby, you got it. And again, you got the Secretary of the Army coming out calling for all this in Foreign Affairs a month ago or so. The question is, why are they gearing up for this? And by the way, well, they say for collapse, as if it wasn't engineered. I've been telling you for 14 years, I've been on air 17, about the planned derivatives collapse. I learned about it from George Humphrey, former Austin City Council member, economist, but more importantly, successful businessman, showing he knows what he's talking about. And it all came true. Like, as soon as George is back in the country, because he lives all over the world, he's got houses everywhere. Can we get him back in here, George Humphrey? Because he'll never talk about himself. I've got to dig up those shows where he laid it all out. Anyways, we're here. We're talking to Dan Feidt, this segment and the next. Dan, I'm going to try to give you the floor. Folks watching at prisonplanet.tv can actually see the documents. They're in your article. They're in our article. This is a public PDF. Ties into all the other re-education camp documents, all of it. What does this signify? Again, you're a journalist. You've worked the Capitol beat there in Minnesota, broken a lot of big stories. You ferreted this out. Give us your analysis of this piece of training that they're giving the Army.
Sure. Good to be with you, Alex, once again. Essentially, this document fits into an important, larger context of similar documents, similar levels of planning for, extended domestic military operations under the command of the central federal government. And so this one includes warrantless search and seizure. It includes, a lot of talk about use of force inside military-operated domestic detention facilities. And it talks about searching for what they call dissidents/snipers and that kind of thing. And I think, if you're ever dealing with a situation where the military are on the streets of the United States, and in my personal experience, I worked at covering the 2008 Republican National Convention and the 2009 G20 conference in Pittsburgh. Those were both events where domestic military activity was at a particularly high level, as they are national special security events, as the RNC and DNC will be later this year as well. And those events are used to kind of run through plans that are similar to this or like this, or kind of the beginnings of implementation.
Yeah, they have snatch and grabs, you name it. Because I like the city cordoning is in here too. Locking down cities is really friendly.
Right. Yeah, and so what I've discovered in early 2010 on a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer web server was a presentation that involved the national level exercise 2011 New Madrid seismic zone earthquake drill that was going on at that time, and accidentally left inside that PowerPoint were annotation notes about a different level of planning above this kind of training, and that plan is called Concept of Operations Plan, or CON Plan 3502, which is held by the U.S. Northern Command, or NORTHCOM. The primary plan that NORTHCOM activates in coordination with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Each FEMA region has offices called DCO, or Defense Coordinating Offices, with about 20 or 30 or so military officers. And so CON Plan 3501 is the sort of nice plan that's used in the event of big disasters, activating helicopters. That's called Defense Support of Civil Authorities. So that's essentially NORTHCOM's #1 plan, and then their #2 plan is called Civil Disturbance Operations, CON Plan 3502.
And that's all in law under John Warner Defense Authorization Act 2007.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should really point out that, again, if you want to get a real handle on how this domestic military situation works, be sure to look at something called the Domestic Operational Law Handbook for Judge Advocates. It has a big picture of the Statue of Liberty on the front of it. It's hosted on loc.gov, and that lays out a ton of detail. It talks about it cites how CON Plan 3502 is the replacement for the old plan called Garden Plot, which was created in the 60s after the Kerner Commission reported on riots in the United States.
And really, it's a reissuance of Rex 84.
Yeah, so Rex 84 was another run-through of the Garden Plot type plan, in the same way that a national special security event is kind of a run-through of 3502.
Exactly. Here's the difference, though. I would guess, and you've done deep research on this as well, in fact, in some cases more than I, so give me your take on it. I would conservatively say there's probably 50 times the funding and actual training now than there was then. Everything looks like they're firing up the engines. They got the lights on. I mean, before it was little documents and Congress freaked out. Now this is everywhere.
Right. I want to point out there's another level that's developed outside the Pentagon as well. Inside the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, has developed a new agency that they've retitled Homeland Security Investigations in the last few months. And this used to be called the ICE OI, Office of Investigations. So if you've seen these pictures of giant trucks being moved around that look like, I think they're called MRAPs, they are military trucks adapted for domestic use, and they're enormous, and they're distributing these across the country. So these HSI units are being pretty much run out of the same offices as other Homeland Security Customs Enforcement offices.
But you agree with me that this is 50 times what it was in the 80s. I mean, they're going operational is my point.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, there are entire levels being built out on this. I mean, I just wrote up a quick blog post on this Civil Disturbance Operations document, which was found by publicintelligence.net. They do a great job. I really support their work. But we see more and more of these things being added up really quickly. And this new ICE HSI Homeland Security Investigations, they're getting their hands in everything. And one article I found said that they were the descendants of the cocaine cowboys of the 1980s, the SWAT teams that were tight with George Bush and the CIA stuff going on. So, we find and I was the first person to kind of point out this new HSI agency in a blog post and sort of satirize the sort of silliness that they have going on, literally landing black helicopters in an exercise at the Super Bowl, and stuff like that. So they're building up more and more of these different bureaucracies. But if we can get a sense of them, if we can get people to kind of track in on what these things are doing, going through primary source documents that are coming out quite a lot. Also, I want to point out, too, we need people to parse through document dumps. That's one thing that needs to happen. There's a good project called Echelon 2 with Barrett Brown that's looked at all these sort of data dumps that have come out of, through Anonymous and things like that. And then there's another one, a group that's mainly based in Europe called Telecomics.
Yes. We got to go to break. Stay there. I'm going to come back and try to give you the floor for that final segment and get you back during the week because your work's so important. But what you're saying is it's not just Dan Feidt, it's not just Alex Jones, it's not just the Electronic Frontier Foundation. This stuff's everywhere, and the globalists are hiding this military buildup against us under hundreds of different configurations. But the point is they're going operational. This isn't just plans. They're taking over. They got troops dressed up as police killing people right now.
Everything we
right, we've got a special report I did on where did humanity come from? What is our prime directive?
Along the coach roads I did ride.
And do people care that we've got a group of social engineers in control directing human development? That's a fact. That's going on. Bill Gates is putting billions into a program. Here it is off a major university site for genetically engineered humans. These are the debates that are happening. And I know your preacher just says, oh, it's the end of the world, don't worry about it. We're going to discuss it here. So powerful info coming up in the final two segments. Dan Feidt, I'm going to get you back up for a full hour on the weekday show that's noon to 3 p.m. Eastern. But we've got about 10 minutes right now in this segment. We got a bunch of documents for people watching on prisonplanet.tv. Radio listeners can go there tomorrow. We'll have the video of this radio interview posted so people can see it. But you've got the floor. Finish your points about this quickening, this acceleration as the iceberg of shadow government emerges to the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall the trend that I've seen accelerating is that, essentially the war has been kind of coming back home. Military contractor technology is now being resold using, Homeland Security as the big label for it. And there's a structure of grant programs that everybody should check out. The something called the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance assigns a ton of grants, and then that's like one of the major funding sources because local governments can't really afford a lot of this silly police state technology, like the big truck that Berkeley got, for example. I believe that came through something called the Department of Homeland Security Urban Areas Security Initiative, or UASI. That's another major one. We see states like Oklahoma, for example, getting really big into drone use. I was just looking, I think the domain is usa-ok.org. It's like an unmanned aerial vehicle like promotion association or something. So they're just trying to build out this thing as quickly as they can, not just in the United States, but all over the world. It's privatized, and the invasion of everybody's privacy is privatized. The coercion of people, whether it's private prisons or privatized, ankle bracelets and stuff. All of these different
our politicians things. And then force us to, and you keep calling it trucks. These are giant, armored mega tanks out of a science fiction movie with weapons all over them.
The ICE, Homeland Security Investigations Department, is getting these enormous trucks as well. And another thing, the last thing I was mentioning, there's a couple of good wikis out there that I really think are really good. One of them is the Echelon 2 wiki with Barrett Brown and the kind of anonymous researcher people. The other one is called Telecomics with an X, BSRE. And they're doing sort of compiling all of these different communications and surveillance technologies that are, used in countries like Libya and Syria, so that big Western contractors, install police state technology in smaller cities to create what I think an expert said to James Bamford was the turnkey totalitarian state, and that's exactly what's happening. I think Glenn Greenwald said it well recently that in order to organize against, powerful and unfair, groups and figures, people need to be able to organize in privacy, and that's essentially what's been taken away from us and then now commodified in a Big Brother system. And so the document that sort of started this discussion, the Civil Disturbance Operations military police planning document from April 2006 that was used at the U.S. Army Military Police School in Fort McClellan, Alabama. That document, from the 2006 era, is very reflective of the behavior that the military had during Hurricane Katrina, confiscating firearms, contravening the Fourth Amendment against warrantless searches, which is exactly what this document...
that was the training. That was the training.
Right. Exactly. They were trained to behave this way, and so that's what you got. It wasn't a full, quote-unquote martial law situation, but whenever there's an escalation in these things, it's really important to have an understanding of these documents and kind of get a handle on them. One other thing I want to mention, an old story from the Republican National Convention in the Twin Cities was... I heard from multiple people there was something about text messages being tracked and some kind of display that they saw in police cars that...
No, that's confirmed. They've had that for about a decade, England admits they track everybody's text messages.
Right. But we want to try to figure out, how exactly this happens. And likewise, people had their houses searched on the basis of what seemed to be package tracking data.
Let me tell you, they have hubs at all the telecoms since the 96 Telecommunications Act illegally running everything through it.
Right, right. And so I think if we can kind of start to identify like the data APIs and like where these different departments are kind of running this data through, it's not that hard to realize that what are called application program interfaces have been put into things like, you know, UPS and FedEx. And so when a national special security event comes to town, they forget about the Fourth Amendment. If you try to file a lawsuit in federal court, I know for a fact, because my friends tried, that the federal judge will not even read your entire filing before he throws it out. Like that is a fact. And there's just I don't know how you force a federal judge to even read your filings if they're not going to read them, but that's how they operate.
No, we've been captured by foreign corporate interests, there's no doubt.
At the mass arrest down by the river during the RNC, that judge did not even read the full filing. But I just want to also throw in, a friend of mine sent me a document called the Federal Interagency Geospatial Concept of Operations, or GeoConops, of Department of Homeland Security. It's version 2.0, July 2010. And I haven't even had the full time to read this thing, but it's got a lot of details about how these different agencies, the military and stuff, kind of operate. On page 10 of it, there's just one of the craziest diagrams I've ever seen of kind of showing how geographic data moves back and forth. It gets to something called the National Incident Management System, which is kind of the main sort of structure that FEMA runs to control incidents.
Listen, so 12 years ago, I was at Marine Corps operations in Oakland, and they let us in to tents with projections with all the police, with everybody's individual tracker phone where they could go in. Everything was satellite watched. They had drones. And I had Marines come to my office a month after and say, we're listeners. We want you to watch this. And they had drones watching us while we were there covering it. They used us knowing we were going as an enemy simulant. Right. So I was part of the exercise. That's how good their intel was, that I thought I was there getting all this, and they had drones watching me.
Yeah, and I think the New York Times just published a story about reporters in a domestic drone army training facility, and the drones were following cars driving around near the base. So
yeah, that's New York Times.
Yeah, and you know, I went to Washington. I think in December. It was cool. I actually got to go to an NDAA protest in the driving rain in front of the White House, and that was kind of a classic moment. But I saw drones flying around on the National Mall, sort of around above the protests and stuff, and they look a little weird because they aren't really moving at the normal speed, and they're usually pretty quiet. But the thing to look for is that they have little red tail lights, because I think the FAA still imposes those rules. They just don't have a white strobe on the bottom, but you can still spot them by the red tail light. And I've heard that people saw them at Occupy protests on the West Coast as well.
Yeah, the drone following us, and I was only shown the tape, and the Marines left, and it was us getting out of our hotel, walking and going to the thing, and they were going, Death Star 708, Death Star, we've got them. And we went to the restaurant at 8 in the morning, we're at the Denny's, we go to the thing, and there are the Marines totally illegally following us, showing, and then quote, they were friends coming to show me. I never knew if it was intimidation or if the Marines out of uniform were actually listeners, but they showed up at, this is like 12 years ago or 10 years ago, at Access TV to show me this. It's amazing. Great job, bro. We're going to talk to you for a full hour this week. Colonel Craig Roberts of Army Intelligence, retired, is going to join us this week. He wants to talk about this. He's going to expose Operation Black Star. We're going to set you up, Dan Feidt. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Look forward to having you back on later in the week. HongPong.com. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com. Our big report coming up on the destiny of humanity straight ahead. Tell your friends to tune in. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.